Thank everyone who's here with us and the organizers of the event. And I'd like to welcome all of the participants and speakers. My name is Pedro. I'm from the Brazil office of Vital Strategies. And today we're launching the Portuguese version of this report about the tax breaks and tax incentives and how this is very harmful for public health in Brazil. Tax breaks for alcohol regulation. So we have a group of specialists here to talk about this. This event is to promote this Vital Strategies report, but it's a partnership with PAHO, ACT, Promoção da Saúde, and the Regulation of Alcohol Committee, CRA in Brazil, and University of Connecticut. And we're very happy because alcohol, as many of you know, is one of the main risk factors for non-communicable diseases throughout the world. And these risk factors is something that we can actually manage and prevent. And we see this every day, at least in Brazil. It's a major risk factor for us. And Vital Strategies, by focusing a lot in developing public policies, to strengthen public policies, and to take this debate to civil society. And so it's a very noble mission to share this report in Brazil and to discuss all of these issues regarding public health. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome and thank our partners that are here with us. And I'd like to invite to present the report our VP for Global Policies, Nanjita Morupta, who's going to present the report to tell us a little bit about the content, the topics, and then we initiate our debate, okay? And then I'll be back to moderate this debate. So Nanita.
Thank you very much. I believe I need permission to share my screen, please. Okay, I have it now. All right. So thank you very much to the organizers for having me here today. On behalf of Vital Strategies, I'm very pleased to share the latest findings from our report, The Sobering Truth, Incentivizing Alcohol, Death and Disability. This report is part of a series of reports that we have produced on the commercial determinants of health and how they affect NCD burdens globally. Now, alcohol, tobacco, fossil fuels, these are commodities that harm human health. They're described therefore. Yes?
Terribly sorry. Just 1 minute. A todas e todos, eu peço mil desculpas. Eu esqueci de dar dois.
We apologize. I forgot to mention two very important things. On the lower part of your screen, there is an interpretation button. It's a globe icon. You can choose the Portuguese or English channel. We have interpretation into both languages. Sorry that I didn't mention this before. And we're also recording this event, okay, to after post this on YouTube. And also we have the Q&A button. Sorry, Anita.
No problem at all. All right, so as I was saying, alcohol, tobacco, fossil fuels, these are all commodities that harm human health. They're responsible for a global burden of NCDs and other injuries and illnesses. And yet, all of these are thriving industries in our society. They receive significant incentives. And we borrow the economist's term and describe these incentives in our report as perverse, because fundamentally, these financial incentives go against the interests of society and its welfare. In Sobering Truth, we describe findings from a narrative review in which we examine all the ways in which the alcohol industry is incentivized. Today, I'll provide a snapshot of those findings, but the full findings are available in the report that I understand is being shared in the chat today. So to begin, we know that the harmful use of alcohol is a major public health concern worldwide, in Brazil, but also worldwide. And we know that alcohol use is the largest risk factor for years of life lost for people between 15 and 49 years old. Alcohol use is linked to a range of non-communicable diseases. It includes cancers, cardiovascular disease, liver disease. It worsens the course of infectious diseases from TB, HIV, AIDS, and of course, most recently, COVID-19. And it also exacerbates mental health conditions. Each year, we know that more than 3 million people die as a result of this harmful use of alcohol, and that represents 1 death every 10 seconds. And the burden of alcohol goes beyond health effects to injuries and crime, violence in the form of homicides, suicides, and the abuse of women and children, and lost productivity. And all of this comes with an economic cost to societies. It's been estimated that the cost of alcohol consumption is more than 1% of gross domestic product in high and middle income countries. For instance, in the case of the US, it's estimated that about $249 billion a year is lost in healthcare and other social costs. And so there've been a number of global pronouncements and commitments and efforts to address the harmful use of alcohol. This started with the Global Action Plan in 2013. The commitment to reduce harmful use of alcohol is present in the Sustainable Development Goals under 3. And there's the WHO's technical package that describes the ways in which harmful use of alcohol can be reduced. And in here is one particularly effective policy proposal, that is raising taxes on alcohol and using this as a pricing mechanism to reduce the availability of alcohol. And yet what we find is that despite all these alcohol policy pronouncements and commitments, governments continue to provide economic incentives to the alcohol industry. And what we underscore in our report is that it is not just cottage industry, small businesses receiving these incentives, but in fact, multi-billion-dollar alcohol companies that are transnational. And so, for instance, in our report, you'll find a number of different forms of financial incentives described. You'll find examples of development assistance. This is the official overseas development aid that's provided for the economic, social development of the recipient countries, and this goes towards alcohol, you will find. You'll find examples of tax breaks, tax rebates, marketing deductions. Going back to the technical package SAFER, one of the mechanisms for reducing alcohol consumption is to put in place restrictions on marketing of alcohol. This is a way of reducing the appeal of alcoholic products and alcohol use. And yet you'll find examples in our report of deductions for marketing of alcohol. You'll find examples of production subsidies, and you'll find examples of incentives offered in the form of international trade agreements. And I'll talk about these briefly in the slides that follow. So to begin with development assistance, again, development assistance, this is the official mechanism of helping recipient countries improve their social and economic welfare. And we report an example in Central and Eastern Europe, where countries face an alcohol epidemic. Since the 1990s, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development has provided more than $422 million in development assistance for investment in breweries. You'll find examples of tax breaks, as is well known to this panel and others in the audience. Binge drinking is a significant problem in Brazil. And yet, during the 2014 World Cup in Brazil, FIFA required Brazil to waive US $475 million in taxes on any profits made by FIFA and its commercial partners, including AB InBev. Marketing deductions. Again, marketing is a really important part of a policy package to address the harmful use of alcohol. Marketing restrictions reduce the attractiveness of alcohol and particularly prevent youth from beginning alcohol use. And yet in the US, for instance, and this example in our report comes from the US, where between 1999 and 2017, alcohol-related deaths more than doubled. And yet we found examples where in a single year alone, The top 10 alcohol producers were exempted from paying taxes on up to 1.5 billion for beer advertising. And this is advertising for just one alcohol product. And this is publicly available data that we were able to report. And therefore, the true scale of the problem is likely to be much higher. We find and report examples of tax rebates. 18.1% of men in Puerto Rico and 23% in the US Virgin Islands report that they binge drink. And yet in 2012 alone, the US federal government provided 230 million in tax rebates to Bacardi in Puerto Rico and 199 million in tax rebates to Diageo in the US Virgin Islands. Production subsidies. Uganda has the 7th highest rate of alcohol consumption in Africa. It is the leading risk factor for years of life lost in that country. And yet you'll find in our report examples of production subsidies for local sorghum for beer produced by SABMiller. And I'll conclude with one final example of international trade being used as a means for encouraging alcohol production. This is an example from India, where the UK government worked to remove pricing regulation on beer worth more than US 80 million in sales for SABMiller. And so in conclusion, in our report, you'll find examples of a number of ways in which governments and development agencies who have committed to reducing the alcohol burdens in their countries are in fact providing billions of dollars in incentives to alcohol companies. What you'll also see is a pattern of findings where incentives most often go to companies with headquarters in high-income countries that are selling in low and middle-income countries. And we would argue that this is a perfect example of exploitation. And the recipients, as noted before, are most often multi-billion-dollar transnational corporations. And so the fundamental finding of this report is that even as countries struggle to meet their health needs, made even worse by the pandemic that we're still living through in so much of the world, products that harm health receive incentives, and this has to stop. And so in conclusion, our report underscores the need for policy coherence as a key means for preventing NCDs. We describe the importance of phasing out incentives. We recognize the importance of that phasing out and a means of investing, redirecting those finances into social programs. And most fundamentally, fiscal policies are an important lever for preventing NCDs. And our report urges countries, governments, stakeholders, everyone to use fiscal policies and finances to prevent NCDs. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nandita. It was a very clear, very straightforward, and very convincing presentation. The report makes it clear how we are subsidizing the death and morbidity of our people. And I think this is a great way to kickstart our panel here on the sobre a tributação das perdão, gente,
taxation. I'm sorry. Taxation and financing of alcohol products in Brazil and how to deal with this. And for this, I'm going to call our moderator, our partner from Vital Strategies in Brazil, General Director from ACT, Paula Johns. Good morning, everyone. Good morning if you're here, or good afternoon or good evening, depending where you are on the globe. My name is Paula Johns. I'm Director of ACT Promoção da Saúde. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Vital Strategies for this report. I think this topic is instrumental in our to really show the numbers, really what's going on in the treatment of non-communicable disease and to deal with the risk factors of this type of disease that are responsible for many deaths in the world today. So congratulations, Vital Strategies, for the report. Congratulations, and to thank all of the partners here, PAHO, the regional office in the Americas. I'd like to really thank the Alcohol Regulation Committee. And now we're going to kick off the panel. Taxation of alcohol beverages in Brazil, a strategy. And just to let everyone know that we have simultaneous interpretation from Portuguese into English or from English into Portuguese. You just have to click on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen, and your questions can be made via the Q&A function that's also the bottom part of your screen. We're going to have 4 panelists. Each one will have 10 minutes to speak. And after, we're going to have a discussion and questions that we receive via the Q&A. Okay, the first panelist is Maxime. And so he's going to talk to us about how to decrease expenditure in health. Maxime Rocha from PAHO, from WHO. Who's based out of Washington. He's a health economist working for economy of non-communicable disease for PAHO since 2019. Maxime's work is focused on prevention and treatment of chronic disease and mental health, as well as to monitor, to promote, and develop evidence and the optimization of fiscal policies for health in Latin America and the Caribbean, including taxation of tobacco, alcohol, sweetened drinks or sweetened beverages, and other non-healthy food products. Before working with PAHO, Dr. Maxime Rocha worked as a consultant for the World Bank in the Global Equity Department and Financial Protection Mechanisms. So he has a master's in economy and public policies from the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. Welcome, Maxime, and you have the floor. You have 10 minutes, okay? When we have 3 minutes left, I'll let you know. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much for the event, and congratulations again for the very invaluable report. So today I'm going to talk about health taxes in general and put a deep focus into alcohol taxes. So first I wanted to look into the devastating epidemic of non-communicable disease. Non-communicable diseases are responsible for 41 million deaths annually around the world, which represents 71% of total death globally. And 37% of those deaths are premature. It means before the age of 69 years old. And what we see is that not even it's a devastating epidemic in terms of health, but also it has huge economic costs. So the economic costs associated with alcohol-related disease do not only include direct healthcare costs, but also the impact on labor productivity and premature mortality on economic output. So this simulation was done by the World Economic Forum in 2011, looking at in the next 20 years, from 2011 to 2030, that NCDs will cost economic output to decrease by 47 trillion, which represent approximately 64% of 1 year of global GDP. So what can we do? We know that out of the 5 main non-communicable diseases that you see in the screen here, we have 5 main common risk factors. And some of them are commercial determinants, so tobacco, alcohol, and unhealthy diet. So we can find fiscal policies to target the commercial determinants of NCDs. We could, of course, here include carbon or fossil fuels, as it was discussed in the previous presentation. So how do health taxes work? So the idea of health taxes, and particularly excise taxes, why particularly excise taxes? Because they allow policymakers to target some products and raise their relative price compared to other products and services in the economy. So this will then increase the price, decrease the affordability, and therefore impact consumption. So excise taxes on tobacco, alcohol, sugar-sweetened beverages are all part of the global action plan to prevent and control NCDs of WHO. And they are part of the most cost-effective and feasible policies for implementation to prevent such diseases. So let's now dive into alcohol particularly, and let's look at let's say the health rationale for such taxes. So we see here on the screen two graphs that look at alcohol consumption in Latin America. So what we see on the left is total per capita consumption in liters of pure alcohol. And what we see on that is that the region of the Americas as a whole is the second region in the world, in WHO region in the world, in terms of adult per capita consumption per liter of pure alcohol, just behind the European region. And we see that the global average is 6.4 liter per capita, and we see that Brazil is just above this global average. In terms of heavy episodic drinking, meaning that 60 or more grams of pure alcohol at least once, at least in one single occasion, at least once per month, we see that the most of the countries in Latin America are above the global average, and we see that Brazil is just above the global average. In terms of economic burden, it was a bit discussed in the previous presentation. I wanted to also talk about some numbers here. So a newly released OECD analysis that included Brazil, of course, as an OECD member, found that alcohol consumption, harmful use of alcohol, reduced life expectancy in OECD countries by 0.9 years on average. And that the disease they cause cost 2.4% of health expenditure, health budgets in OECD countries. And some former studies have even found that it could go up as high as 7%, for example, in France, of total health expenditures. And as I discussed before with NCDs, and now diving into mainly alcohol, the impact on the economy is not only about healthcare expenditure, but also related to the absenteeism, people being absent at work, or presenteeism, being present at work but less productive, premature labor force exit, premature mortality. All of that impact the labor market, impact overall economic growth. And that is what the OECD modeled here. And they found that on average in OECD countries, it decreases by 1.6% the GDP. It impacts the GDP by 1.6% of OECD countries. So in addition to the health burden of 5.5% of total death in the Americas, for example, and 6.7% of disability adjusted life years, the morbidity, it has also a significant impact on economic growth. So let us look at why taxes are efficient in reducing consumption. So here what you see on the screen are meta-analyses that look into high and low and middle income countries and look into different beverage categories and their elasticity. What we see is that alcoholic beverages consumption is inelastic. We see that the elasticities range from minus 0.5 to minus 0.7, minus 0.8. That means that a 10% increase in the price of beer, for example, what you see here in the screen, will lead to a 5% on average decrease in consumption. But it's not only the consumption that's reacting to price changes, but also alcohol-related negative health outcomes. So what we see on the screen here is also other meta-analysis that looks at alcohol-related harms and how it decreases with increases in prices. So we see, for example, here an example of sexually transmitted diseases, where we see a price elasticity of minus 0.05, meaning that a 10% increase in alcohol prices could lead to here a 0.5% decrease in sexually transmitted diseases. And same, we see crime, we see rape, suicide. So here are some meta-analyses that are based on high-income countries. So there is also some simulation that have been done on how alcohol taxes could help decrease alcohol consumption, decrease alcohol-related harms, and increase tax revenues. So here we see the high potential on that slide from a simulation done by the Bloomberg Task Force in 2019 on fiscal policies for health, that alcohol taxes is simulated as a 50% increase in price on tobacco, alcohol, and sugar-sweetened beverages here globally on a 50-year period. We see that it could lead to really high and significant tax revenues. And we see that, for example, alcohol that you see in the middle in the bottom right graph have the highest potential in terms of tax revenue compared to the two other products, and could lead to approximately 1% of GDP in terms of tax revenue in lower middle income countries if it were raised to represent an increase in 50% of the price. And this high potential for tax revenues for alcohol taxes come from the fact that the current levels of taxes are really low, particularly in low and middle income countries. So
3 minutes left. 3 minutes.
Of such, okay, thank you. Of such taxes in the world. So what we see here is that alcohol taxes such as tobacco taxes are widely implemented and for a long time. In the Americas, only Antigua and Barbuda and Cuba do not apply such taxes. However, there is quite a significant heterogeneity in the way they are applied. For example, some countries like Argentina or Uruguay do not apply them on wine. So while we know which country apply excise taxes, as I was just showing on the screen, we don't know much about the tax levels, and it's not monitored enough in WHO and globally. Like tobacco taxes are monitored, for example. So here what you see is tobacco taxes, how they are monitored by WHO through a tax share indicator, meaning the share of the price that's represented by taxes in the price of the most sold brand of cigarettes. So in PAHO, we have been piloting and trying to develop similar indicators for beer, wine, and spirits. So we led a pilot in 2019, and we're now scaling it up to region-wide. And what we see is that there is high heterogeneity between structures and tax levels across countries. We see here, for example, Guyana, Jamaica, Suriname, which apply amount-specific excise taxes on such products. And we see Paraguay with an ad valorem excise tax, and we see El Salvador with a mixed structure. And here on the screen, you will see spirits too, and a comparison of the different excise tax share by country and by beverages. So what we see is that wine on average is mostly taxed lower in terms of level than the other products. And in addition, we see that spirits is usually taxed higher than the other products. But we see that the level of taxation is quite low. Mostly less than 20% of the price is represented by excise taxes. This is way lower than it is for tobacco, for example, where the median in the region is 36%, and some countries goes as high as 70% of excise taxes in the price. So this indicator, of course, has limitations. It doesn't take into account subsidies to the industry or tax discounts or rebates, like it was discussed in very well presented in the Vital Strategies report. But it gives a good indication of the fact that tax levels are low in the region of the Americas, and I'm sure we could find the same globally. So finally, I wanted to say that alcohol taxes, as other excise taxes for health, also health taxes, is a win-win-win-win policy. What we mean by that is that it reduces the consumption of health farming products. It increases the financial viability of health system by reducing associated healthcare costs, reduce social costs by increasing well-being and the productivity of the workforce, and finally bring excise tax revenue that could be helpful to finance development. And what as it was discussed before, COVID-19 is now the time even more to apply such taxes because they contribute to prevent NCDs that are linked with high risk of serious complication from COVID-19. They lead to an immediate and additional source of tax revenue. And this revenue could be used for economic recovery after the COVID-19 pandemic, but also to achieve universal health if they are earmarked for health. So I wanted to thank you. And here you can find some more mandates and documents from PAHO and WHO and our webpage. Thank you.
Muito obrigada, Maxime.
Okay, Maxime, thank you so much. We really could see that despite not doing all of the monitoring that we should be doing, the numbers are scandalous. The burden, the costs that we have with alcohol and tobacco consumption. I'm going to call now our next speaker, Thomas Baber. It's a great pleasure of having you here with us, Professor Tom, Professor of Community Medicine and Public Health at the University of Connecticut. He's a major specialist in alcohol control public policies. Dr. Baber has been collaborating extensively, a consultant in many countries in Africa, in Latin America, in the Caribbean. He's a member of the WHO group of specialists in alcohol. Anyway, Dr. Baber's contributions are quite impressive. It's a great pleasure to have you here with us, Dr. Baber. You have 10 minutes, okay? When you have 3 minutes left, I'll let you know. You have the floor. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. If we could get my slides up here. It's a great pleasure to be involved in this webinar because of the obvious importance, not only of health taxes, but of the interest that is expressed in the report and the work of PAHO and other organizations in the alcohol industry itself. And for many years, the alcohol industry has been considered the elephant in the room. People, it's so big and it just stands there that people don't even notice it because its influence is pervasive. And the question is, how do we recognize the enormous power of the industry to influence policy, and in particular, to influence policies connected with alcohol taxes? Alcohol taxes are a major threat to the industry, and the industry has grown dramatically in recent years in ways that allow it to exert political power to protect its financial interests. So the next slide really shows the trends that have led to a situation where we have powerful transnational corporations that are capable of operating with impunity in the major countries of the world, and in the developing world in particular, in ways that maintain their power to influence the health of populations by marketing commercial products that are harmful to health. The producers have become highly concentrated into a small number of transnational corporations, particularly ones that affect NCD or non-communicable disease risk factors. The concentration of the industries means that they have increased profits, the ability to market anywhere in the world, and their cross-border marketing strategies are now focusing on digital technologies and social media, which are not controlled by government or international agencies. Their relationships with organizations and NGOs, all in the name of corporate social responsibility, create conflicts of interest, which minimize the influence of these organizations. And the industry now can be considered a major inducer of alcohol problems through its political and commercial activities, marketing in particular, but also product design. The next slide starts to provide us with information about how the industry operates. I'm going to skip this one, but the major producers are AB InBev, SAB Miller, Heineken, Carlsberg, Diageo. We've heard some of these mentioned, Pernod Ricard. Many or most of them are operating in Brazil and exerting enormous political influence. Next slide. What we need, and this is towards the end of my presentation. Can we go to the next slide? Here are the strategies employed by alcohol and other industries to oppose health taxes. They use front groups that are seemingly independent to appeal to the public with arguments that criticize the imposition of health taxes. They work with respected allies in organizations and in government to increase the credibility of anti-tax arguments, which I'll review in a minute. But these arguments have been found through extensive research not to be valid. They lobby using traditional lobbying techniques by influencing politicians, targeting decision makers in government, both directly through contributions, political contributions, and indirectly by influencing voters, using front groups to make political activity hazardous for politicians' careers. If it criticizes or goes against the industry's priorities. They use media, newspaper articles, opinion pieces, letters to the editor to encourage public opposition to health taxes and alcohol taxes in particular. They commission research and they influence the scientific community subtly through scientific contributions to scientific research, and they're commissioning their own research now and biasing the results to make it appear that there are questions about the effectiveness of health taxes when we know there's a massive amount of data that show how alcohol taxes diminish affordability and reduce alcohol consumption as well as alcohol problems. They employ consultants, public relations, and advertising firms to gain assistance and to bring their strategies into the political process. They pay by giving gifts to policymakers to increase their political support. They mount legal and official challenges to combat tax legislation. They confuse the debates about tax increases with broader tax debates and economic theories that argue that regulation and taxation are threats to the economy. They work collaboratively with counter proposals to diminish the impact of health taxes. And when the taxes are passed, they try to reduce the regulatory process and propose alternative legislation. The next slide just gives...
You have 3 minutes, Professor Baker.
Okay, next one. So what we're talking about is a variety of tactics and strategy to neutralize the impact of health taxes. Can we have the next slide?
Próximo slide, por favor.
Yeah. Using experts who are friendly and arguing that smuggling will increase and illicit production will increase. They use industry employees. All of these tactics have been developed by the tobacco industry, by the oil industry, by the processed food industry, sugar sweetened beverages. They all use the same tactics. And the alcohol industry has been particularly effective in promoting its financial interest at the expense of public health. Next slide, please. They have many arguments against health taxes, and all of these arguments have been found to not to be valid and contradicted by the results of good research that show that alcohol taxes are an effective strategy, one of the most effective strategies that we have available. And finally, I'm going to talk about a few countermeasures in the next slides that give us some optimism about how we can neutralize the influence of the alcohol industry itself. What we should be doing is first conducting public health surveillance of the alcohol industry itself. And by monitoring the industry, we're in a position to reduce its influence by especially showing the bad behavior that they demonstrate by bribery, lobbying, working behind the scenes, and distorting the scientific information about the public health that should be used for the guidance of alcohol policies rather than to oppose them. We should be asking for economic impact statements of the industry proposals so that we have a better idea of how the alcohol industry itself is incapable of helping with the prevention of alcohol problems. Their corporate responsibility activities are not effective, but they do contribute to ill health because of their ineffectiveness as alternatives to the effective policies themselves. We can do a variety of other things, including not collaborating with the industry, not partnering with the industry, and I'll be stopping in a minute, and strengthening the network of organizations like PAHO and Vital Strategies that are working around the world to oppose the policies of the alcohol industry. So thank you to Vital Strategies for your report, to PAHO for the support you've provided, and good luck in Brazil with dealing with the alcohol industry. Thank you, Paula, and the organizers of this panel.
Muito obrigado, Professor Baber. Acho que trouxe
Thank you, Professor Baber. This is another important piece of this puzzle, the importance of understanding the practices, the policies of the alcohol industry and how this impacts in health indicators. And I remembered another publication from Vital Strategies that I think is very relevant, which is Fool Me Twice, which makes this comparison between the industries and how the tactics are quite similar. I really recommend you reading that. Now, our next panelist here is Guilherme Message, who's a psychiatrist. He's a master's and doctorate at the School of Medicine at University of São Paulo and also Santa Casa in São Paulo. He's a leader in Brazil in Collaborating Center for Values-Based Practices in Health and Social Care, St. Catherine's College in Oxford. He's also the coordinator of the Committee for Alcohol Regulation, and it's through this committee that's been leading initiatives in the social and civil society for the regulation of alcohol in Brazil. So you'll have the floor, and just to, you have 10 minutes, and just reminding our audience, you can send your questions via the Q&A function. Guilherme, you have 10 minutes, and when you have 3 minutes left, I'll let you know. Okay, thank you so much. You have the floor. Thank you, Paula. Thank you so much for this wonderful moderation and the wonderful event. I'd like to thank all of you for the invitation from Vital Strategies and from PAHO as well, in order to be part of this launch of this report that's instrumental for public policies in Brazil regarding alcohol. And so this is extremely welcome. And also, I'm very honored to be part of a highly qualified team of international specialists, sharing this panel with me, who definitely are the greatest leaders in the world about this topic. I am very humble in saying, perhaps not as an academic, although I am academic, and not as a physician, although I am a physician, but as an activist, an advocate of something that's very difficult. So I'm going to give you a quick presentation, a couple of slides that I chose to show you quickly. But above all, I wanted to say that all of this that was presented until now from the previous speakers, and that we're still going to hear with Maristela, in Brazil, in terms of alcohol, we're trying to coordinate political activities that will provide results. The great experience in these years of the committee and is the silence from the executive branch of government. Basically, no willingness to do anything about the problem. The finance minister proposed alcohol taxation, but very quickly forgot about this. In the beginning of the government in 2018, the new government, the first few days we heard there was going to be a lot of regulation through the Ministry of Health and the economy, but this was forgotten in basically 24 hours. In very little time, the ideas just disappeared in thin air. Any democratic regulation has really just disappeared into thin air. So I want to share with you experience that is very dear to me, which is the Scottish experience to tax alcohol consumption. It's recent regulation, but in terms of principles and execution, I think it's very interesting. It's very interesting for us to look at. This idea, I also collected some data in Scotland's NHS. And so in May 2018, they initiated a policy that taxes a minimum value for alcohol for the beverages that are very, very cheap. Alcoholic beverages, the impact on health, they're way too cheap. So it's not universal taxation of alcoholic beverages. And so, well, this is extremely interesting. They were able to obtain reductions, not a huge reduction, but it's only been enforced for a few years, and this will be evaluated in 5 years. But they obtained a reduction where there was the largest problem. And so they were able to obtain a reduction without a major change in prices, alcoholic beverages. The average price was basically the same. Very well. Now, some interesting information that we need to look at when we defend this kind of policy, this very important policy, is that it impacts in parts of society, especially when we talk about stronger drinks. Like it's different from beer and certain wines, but what about the impacts in children below 18 years of age? And this is the target population of the alcohol industry in Brazil. Every year that goes by, they try to reach out to this population in both genders, boys and girls that are below 18 years of age, in order to think about the future of the industry. Now, these arguments against, that are usually economic arguments, that the global impact for the economy was very modest, was tiny, very a small negative impact on the economy, but a great impact, a positive impact in the economy in a policy such as this one. These specific taxes for the consumption of certain substances. We don't even have the correct name for this in Brazil, for health taxes, for example. So how the Scottish population has been understanding, has been seeing this new policy. So you can see on the screen, I know it's a busy slide, tiny words, but the yellow bars, it's before the approval of this law. And it's being discussed, but in black, it's 2019, after the law came into force. Look how the perception grew of the population, of the need of this new law. And so the population is supporting this new law, especially for health matters. Public security as well, but the population sees that this is extremely important, this type of health taxes, for the general problems caused by alcohol abuse, and people that have problems with this be protected. So it's a public policy. It's the results of public perception, very, very desired, I would say. And in the third bar, the third part there, you can see the rejection amongst the Scottish population in health taxes has dropped substantially in this idea that taxation is unfair, that it's going to increase the prices for everyone, and everyone won't be able to drink anymore. 3 minutes left, Guilherme. Yeah, thank you, Paula. This didn't happen, but this dropped substantially. It's actually the greatest drop, I would say, amongst the Scottish population. Their perception of this law after it came into force is quite satisfactory. And people understand that this kind of change is important, especially if the conclusions can be shared with the population, transparency and communication. Now, in Brazil, a major part, basically not all of the information that gets to the press regarding alcohol abuse and alcohol data come from an organization that's financed by the alcohol industry. The data, is extremely biased. And there's a huge silence in our society, a noisy silence, if you will. And we haven't been able to get around that. Anyway, thank you very much for your attention. And I'm going to leave you with this website from CRA, from the Alcohol Regulation Committee, an initiative from civil society that is sponsored, stimulated by the School of Medical Sciences in University of São Paulo and the Santa Casa. So we need everyone's support, and log on to our website, check it out, and get in touch with us. So support us to disseminate, to pass this idea along. Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Guilherme. I think very interesting elements, talking about pricing, how pricing can influence, and how we have elements to justify, acceptance of a higher price. It's important in decisions regarding consumption. And just to remind you, Maxime's argument that despite we hear these arguments that go against increases in taxes and prices, usually coming from the alcohol industry, is a situation for society as a whole, for individuals, for health, for the economy, for win-win-win. We need to bear this in mind. Now, our last panelist here, last but not least, fantastic Maristela Monteiro, who's a true leader and advocate, senior consultant in PAHO for 17 years now, after having coordinated during 10 years the substance abuse program in the WHO in Geneva. She is a physician, has a PhD in psychopharmacology from the Federal University of São Paulo, postdoc in the Department of Psychiatry from the University of California in San Diego. And Dr. Maristela Monteiro is responsible for technical cooperation related to alcohol control policies, research, capacity building for the Americas. And Maristela also is the author of more than 180 publications in scientific journals and book chapters. And Maristela is relentless in this very important fight and struggle regarding alcohol control. Maristela, you have the floor. It's a great pleasure to have you here with us. As always, you have 10 minutes. Yes, thank you so much, Paula. And thank you, Vital Strategies, for the report, for the support that's been given, not only in Brazil, but internationally as well, to help us to promote these policies. Now, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Yes, everything's okay. Wonderful. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the WHO initiative that has this acronym SAFER, and how this initiative has great potential for Brazil. The UN and the WHO has already measured the dimension of the alcohol problem in the world with different reports in different areas and different expert committees. Also, we've seen reviews, literature reviews, books with all the evidence about what are the policies and programs that can help to prevent alcohol problems. Decisions at a world level, a world strategy to reduce harmful effects of alcohol that was approved in 2011. This was the first major decision from the WHO in this area, specifically for alcohol. And finally, the coordinated initiatives and focused initiatives in the most cost-effective measures that are in this package or this initiative called SAFER from the WHO. This initiative also is accompanied by the launch of the Sustainable Development Goals, because alcohol is related not only to health indicators, 3.4, as well as chronic disease, but together in the indicator 3.5, there's a sub-indicator which is exclusive for alcohol, which is the per capita consumption of alcohol that's measured. And another indicator is treatment coverage for alcohol abuse and other drugs. Now, alcohol is linked also to other objectives, sustainable development goals, especially because of the fact that the alcohol industry and the impacts, the production, the sales and distribution, marketing of alcoholic beverages has, in terms of the environment, water, and also in other factors, such as violence, domestic violence, car crashes, poverty, violence, etc. So this initiative, SAFER, was built with the support of many partners of PAHO and the WHO. And the idea is to support the member states to fight against alcohol abuse, focusing on certain measures, but that are consistent with the world strategy. And also with a regional plan from PAHO for alcohol. It was launched in 2018 at the high-level meeting and CDs at the UN, and also launched in Brazil in October of 2019 in PAHO's office with stakeholders, very important stakeholders, NGOs, specialists, scientific community, and also international specialists. Now, what are these 5 measures in SAFER? First, to reinforce restrictions, physical availability of alcohol in terms of time, location, day of the week, smaller sales, the density of points of sale. This all means physical availability. The measures against drinking and driving, to facilitate access to early detection, quick interventions, and treatment of alcohol abuse, to prohibit or regulate sponsorship, marketing and promotion of alcohol, and basically all means of communication, and to increase prices of alcohols through selective taxes and health taxes. So it's not because this is the last letter here in R that is the least important. Much on the contrary, of all these measures, perhaps the most cost-effective one is to use taxes, and the decrease of the purchasing power or access to alcohol beverages regarding other products. Now, who are the main stakeholders helping us to implement this strategy? It could be coordinated. There's a lot from the health sector in terms of services, surveillance, monitoring, and data analysis, but also partnerships with other sectors, because taxation measures have really nothing to do with the health sector. So this multi-sectorial work, if you will, and all aligned within a country, within a government, is instrumental so that the initiative can be effective and successful, and will bring about a true reduction in alcohol consumption. And there are many sectors, education, transportation, legislation, licensing, business and trade, and the state and federal revenue services. Now, the safer process is basically linked to technical guides from the WHO and adapted for the different regions, programmed action, support for countries, and advocacy and activism, and also mobilization of resources in the different countries. This is one strategy for communication, and focused on three strategies for the country to implement, protect, and monitor the consumption and the harm of alcohol. So what are these national strategies? Of course, a regulatory framework, the enforcement, the sustainable financing or funding of actions, and multi-sectorial collaboration. Um, Monitoring, you have surveillance, epidemiologic surveillance, the monitoring of policies, integrated information system that can feed uh, into these policies, is the review of policies to advance little by little to see if we're really having an effect. You have 3 minutes left. 3 minutes, Maristela. Right. The third strategy is to protect the public health goals, always evidence-based, transparency in our processes, and to decrease conflicts of interest. Some examples of what can be done to prepare a country to implement safer is to know the extension of the problem, to estimate, in the case of Brazil, the cost of alcohol consumption in Brazil, to map the different public policies, identify who are the key stakeholders, and in different situations in the country that are related between alcohol and inequities, social inequities, to promote this political institutional commitment in order to strengthen political action and to work together with civil society to promote each step of an action plan focused on these measures. And to finish, some examples of what we can do with the opportunities that exist to move forward with these proposals in the context of taxation in our country, to use taxes in such a way for public health. In other words, to decrease access to alcohol beverages, to decrease consumption, and levy more taxes, more resources for specific measures, or to fund development, to strengthen enforcement of drinking and driving. This is already something that we adopt in Brazil, but greater enforcement, if you will. The implementation of a licensing system. In the country, we don't have a license system for the sale of alcoholic beverages that can be used in this sense. To strengthen the regulation of sponsorship, advertising, and promotion of alcohol. Basically, there's no regulation whatsoever in Brazil that's effective for alcoholic beverages, much on the contrary. And to create mechanisms to prevent the influence of the alcohol industry, as many have spoken, with public policies for the control of this consumption. And so we really need to consider this, and there's really from a global standpoint, the possibility of collaboration There's always a conflict of interest, significant conflict of interest in this sense. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Maristela. It's wonderful. I mean, I think we have an excellent idea here to initiate our debate. Without any further ado, one first question for Maxime, because he has to leave us in about 5 minutes, regarding taxation. I mean, Brazil is discussing a tax reform. We hear a lot about a single tax. So I want you to comment, Maxime, please, what we need to be careful with in order to guarantee a more expensive price for the end consumer. What recommendations in this regard? And now that's linked to another thing that I want you to talk about, Maxime, is technically what we call regression, but one of the discussions in Brazil regarding social inequalities is that if you increase taxes on consumption, that would increase this regressiveness. If you could talk about alcohol consumption from this distribution point of view. Thank you very much. You have the floor, Maxime.
Thank you for the question, Paula. So first, yeah, about the tax reform discussed in Brazil. So this tax reform wants to gather together several taxes that are existing in Brazil under a type of VAT that looks like European VAT, in a sense that it will be applied in every stage of production. So we could feel like simpler is better in terms of tax structure. What we need to be very careful from a health perspective is that the tax burden currently applied on alcohol at least doesn't decrease, and if possible, increases. So that would be a first message. And then I think it represents a great opportunity to also introduce what we call a health tax, an excise tax for health that apply on unhealthy products, such as tobacco, alcohol, sugar sweetened beverages, unhealthy diet, carbon fuel, all the one that we listed before, and make sure that these excise taxes, this excise tax is significant enough to decrease the affordability of such products compared to other goods and services in the economy. And on your second question on the regressiveness of potential regressiveness of such taxes. So this has been studied a lot in mostly on tobacco taxes and lately on sugary drink taxes. What we see is that, of course, by increasing the price of such projects, people that consume such projects are going to pay more for those projects. So it's going to increase their expenditures on such projects. However, as we saw during the different presentation, consumers react to prices, and the most vulnerable react even more to price increase. So then this consumption is going to decrease. And in the short term, it might imply a higher expenditure on those products, but we need to look at it on the long term and include health expenditures that are going to be saved by being less sick or by not falling sick because of reducing or stopping the consumption of those unhealthy products. And we need to also factor in that in the long run, by being healthier, we are more productive, we have better careers, and we might obtain higher incomes in the long run and have longer lives and longer working years. So if you factor all of that in, you realize that such policies, health taxes, are actually progressive in the sense that the poorest benefit the most out of it.
Muito obrigada, Maxime.
Yes, thank you so much, Maxime. We have some questions here in the chat that actually, here in the Q&A, many that have already been answered. About maximum volume, there's no safe volume, totally safe quantity of alcohol for consumption. There's a question here that I'm going to link this with a question to Professor Tom Baber, which is about the issue of the argument from the alcohol industry always want to be part of the solution. You know, and this is linked to another question that appeared here regarding conflict of interest. So if you can comment, please, about this issue of the industry that wants to be part of the solution, mainly through these multilateral mechanisms that the UN, for example, the alcohol industry is not excluded from the UN system, just like tobacco and firearms. So if you could comment about this topic, and the disposition of the industry to be part of the solution and having the space on the negotiation table. Professor Baber, if you will.
Yeah, thank you. That's an excellent question. And the issue is whether the industry is really serious about collaborating in the interest of public health. And what they have demonstrated repeatedly is that they are disingenuous, they are not serious, and they have a strategy to undermine the ability of the public health community and civil society organizations to do their work effectively. The industry has, if they really wanted to support the work of the public health community and partner in an effective, responsible way, they would cease their lobbying activities. They would provide data that is available to them in terms of their marketing activities, which often violate the industry guidelines themselves that they have set. A lot of what they do seems to be public relations rather than public health. And collaboration with civil society and with government is something which is part of a strategy to undermine the work of these organizations rather than to facilitate it. And the more that these organizations and government collaborate with them, the less effective they're going to be.
Obrigada.
Okay, thank you. I would like now to ask a question, even linking that to many strategies that the alcohol industry that want to include themselves as part of the solution in the fight against the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. So to talk a little bit about Brazil. So a question for Guilherme. Guilherme, what have you seen in this sense? I mean, about consumption, if there's an increase in consumption. I mean, what have you seen these strategies from the industry regarding COVID-19? Right. For the industry, COVID was a great opportunity. You know, it seemed to be leading the solution, at least in the beginning, and financing a whole bunch of activities, you know, artistic activities in the name of a possible solution, and a development of strategies, sales strategies through the internet, online, with e-commerce. So Brazil is a country where people drink usually out of their homes. People don't drink so much in their homes, but this has changed because of the pandemic, of course. So with this change, those that used to drink, now they're drinking more. Those that were most vulnerable suffered a greater impact. And so we've been seeing that. But of course, the results of the industry show the increase in sales during the pandemic for sure. Right, thank you, Guilherme. What we've seen and what we've been trying to map, easy delivery to guarantee that people have access through an app, these delivery apps. So it's not only cheaper, but the access is easy for people to consume alcoholic beverages during the pandemic. Now, there's a question here. I'm going to ask for everybody to comment. Let's start with Maristela, if that's okay. A comment, reduction strategy to avoid consumption through persuasive communication for a change in behavior. I'm going to link this comment from Valdolino, asking a comment, you know, how to deal with the issue of individual versus the population. I mean, there is that challenge, you know, a lot of the communication focuses on individual behavior, and we forget a little bit the environment that people are living in and what type of behavior that this kind of environment facilitates. Maybe we can start with Maristela, please. Yeah, thank you. I briefly answered here by saying that if these strategies, individual strategies of persuasion, if they worked, we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in today. And so it's extremely important to recognize, to acknowledge the importance of public policies, because when they are evaluated, when we say that these are the most cost effective, it's because they were evaluated in comparison to just educational strategies or mass communication. Now, with this, I think, the problem, of course, there are people that can be persuaded to change their behavior, sure. But the campaigns, the public health campaigns and educational work in schools, for example, it's very difficult to compete with marketing, the mass marketing, intense marketing from industry. And so 1 hour of the curriculum, school curriculum, dedicated towards prevention, or a brief intervention, I don't know, 5 minutes compared to 24 hours that we have alcohol promotion as a positive lifestyle, and it's good for your health, etc. It's very difficult to compete. And so we need, to remove these hurdles so that these campaigns, these elements can be more effective. Right. Thank you, Maristela. We have a comment here, a great comment. I'm going to link this comment with something that you already answered about women, the women drinking. And so I'd even like to congratulate for the initiative, because like we saw in the tobacco industry, an entire strategy geared towards women and associated to the emancipation of women in a very male-centered society, and how this kind of industry uses the most vulnerable groups to promote their products and to cause even greater problems. So first of all, congratulations, Graziella. I think it's always great to have this dialogue. You're part of this wonderful group, because we've really seen, a marketing, especially beer, showing, women who drink, not only men. Usually those that order a beer are men, but we've seen many marketing strategies geared towards women with this idea of emancipation, the emancipation of women. So it's really great, that it's really great to hear more about this, and that there are groups organizing themselves in this regard. Well, we didn't have too much time, but I'd like to open the floor so that the panelists can, give us their last thoughts. What windows of opportunities we have. If we know Brazil, like Guilherme, what's the window of opportunity that we can have with safer, and what can we do, to try and reduce these obstacles, these hurdles regarding the implementation of public policies, effective public policies, to create an environment that won't promote any further alcohol consumption. Let's start with Guilherme, and then Thomas, Weber, and then Maristela. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. Once again, thank you so much. It's a great honor to be here in this top-notch panel. I think the window of opportunity for us is linked to the possibility of taxing. The tax reform is extremely necessary in terms of health, public health. it's more in terms of health than money that we need. I think that's the way we need to go.
Professor Baber, you want to make some final considerations? Agora eu, que nem o Pedro, tecla zap aqui.
Yeah, for final words, I would say this. The public health community needs to present a positive message. And that message could be, number one, that health taxes can have an enormous impact at a population level that goes far beyond the effects of individual level interventions. So treatment and prevention have some positive effects, but none of them will add up to the enormous impact at a population level of raising taxes and controlling availability. And we've seen in the case of Russia with these kinds of programs, we can increase life expectancy at the population level by 4 or 5 years. Can you imagine that in a high consumption country like Brazil or Russia, that we could, by diminishing consumption, we can increase the number of years of life for the general population by 4 or 5 years? That is enormous. Secondly, the main message that we want to give is that health taxes are not a way of punishing or taking away somebody's freedom to drink. They're a way of financing our healthcare system, making the population healthier, and continuing to give people the choice of enjoying alcoholic beverages if they want them, but making the industry pay for the costs of the damage that is done by their product.
Obrigada, Maristela.
Thank you so much. Maristela? Yeah, I think we need to change our discourse for sure, our public health discourse and civil society as a whole. So that people can think how alcohol is favoring inequalities, increasing inequalities in Brazil. Women are being used for marketing purposes, and they're being victims of this consumption. And alcohol, regarding breast cancer, most women don't know about this, risk, and continue thinking that drinking, especially in breast cancer awareness raising month, and also the value, the importance of marketing in stimulating consumption amongst youth, children and adolescents, and increasing this consumption to an abusive level. An example that we've seen, especially in the media, Coca-Cola and the football player who did not drink Coca-Cola and actually said drink water. That was a loss of 4 billion in the financial market for Coca-Cola. And after it was repeated with Heineken and another football player that didn't want to promote the beer. So this really shows the importance that marketing has for the sale of alcoholic beverages. When somebody is saying, I'm not going to do this, immediately the industry comes out losing, and that's why they invest in marketing. And so we need to raise people's awareness, how they're being manipulated, as it's happened already with tobacco. Anyway, I can go on for hours and hours. Yes, thank you so much, Maristela. I'm going to pass the floor back to Pedro. One last thing that I want to mention that I think is extremely interesting and kind of sums this up. We're going through a pandemic. We need more resources for health. So I'm going to say that taxation of unhealthy products is the best public-private partnership that exists. The rest is just strategies and marketing ploys. Pedro, you have the floor. Thank you so much to all our partners, to everyone, and we're together in this fight. Thank you so much. Pedro, take it away. Yeah, thank you so much, Paula. This was a great moment to be here with all of you sharing this experience. Thank you so much, Paula, ACT, and all other partners, Maristela, my name is Guilherme, Tom, Maxime, who unfortunately has already left, and Anita also, who kicked off the whole event, but has already left us. I just want to reinforce a couple of things, nothing formal. We're going to make this recording available on the YouTube channel if anyone's interested. But in terms of content, it's very important to make a parallel, if you will, with tobacco policies to understand what we're talking about is not a violation of individual liberties, but a greater healthcare for all. And how the example that Professor Tom shared with us, 4 years of life expectancy gains for the population in economic terms, you can't do that with other policies. It's really a win-win-win, like Maxime showed us. So we're going through a moment of scarcity, a difficult moment. And this kind of policy, like we've seen with tobacco and other products, these are policies that, if there's political will, if we get around conflict of interest issues, I think we can, this can be beneficial for the entire population. And so I just wanted to say congratulations once again, and also to do some marketing. This is the third report dedicated to alcohol that we're publishing. We had another report, but fool me twice. It shows how the food industry, processed food industry and alcohol use the same strategies. And also another report called Trouble Brewing that shows problems for public health in alcohol consumption. And now this about tax breaks. So just as a reference of content,
a gente precisa passar para ação. E é possível passar para ação.
We've seen here. Just like we've been doing with tobacco, reducing to 1/3 the consumption that we had 20 years ago. And we can do this with alcohol as well, without violating individual liberties and freedoms, etc. Much on the contrary, increasing more and more to save lives. So thank you very much, everyone that was here with us. And thank you so much. I hope that we can continue this at other opportunities, other webinars. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.